Configuring basic route redistribution. Here's what I've got. Ham, steak, and eggs routers that are building our corporate environment. On the left-hand side, ham and steak are running the RIP routing protocol. RIP has, we'll just say, a whole bunch of VLANs over here on the left-hand side, 10.1.x, which will be 1 through 6. Over on the right-hand side, we have the eggs router running the OSPF protocol with 172.17.x, a whole bunch of VLANs there, which are actually created by loopback interfaces. And in the middle lies steak. It feels like a boxing match, doesn't it? In the middle, ping! So, as of right now, let's just get a lay of the land. I'm going to hop over to ham over there on the left-hand side and do a show IP route. And you can see that ham knows about pretty much nothing. It knows about this network 172.172.16.20 simply because when you run router RIP, you can't specify a wildcard mask. So you type in network 172.16, you can't help but advertise that network over on the other side. Whereas eggs, you can get a little more specific and use a wildcard mask, so it knows about nothing, right? Essentially connected interfaces via that loopback. And then over here in the middle lies steak, who knows about everything. So I'll do a show IP route. He is informed because he's running both OSPF and RIP. He's getting all these from ham, all these from eggs, right? Everybody feeling good about where we're at right now? Let's do the redistribution. So I'm sitting on the steak router. Key fact is we want to go into the protocol we want to redistribute into. So if I want to send OSPF routes into RIP, I'm going to do config t router RIP and then do redistribute OSPF. So I'm sending OSPF into RIP. It's going to ask for the process ID. I'll say 1. Now it's going to ask for the metric. Okay, what's up with this? Well, the metric is essentially the seed metric. What do you want these routes to start with? I'm about to send a whole bunch of routes over here into the RIP world. How many, well, in this case, hops do you want them to start with? You got to remember, if you don't specify a metric, they're actually going to come over with an infinite metric, essentially a hop count of 16, and the first router to get them is going to end up dropping the routes. And you might say, well, why, oh why, does it allow you to press the enter key? Notice right here, right after I said redistribute OSPF, it's like, oh, you could press enter. Why would they let you do that and redistribute an infinite metric? Well, a couple of reasons. One, well, let's do this. Let's just say I want a metric of 5, right? You can go in and match specific routes that you want to redistribute. We'll talk about redistribute map later on, a separate nugget. But I hit the enter key. You can actually specify a default metric, right? I can say I want the default metric to be 3. Right? And then anytime you type in redistribute, I could do redistribute, and notice you can redistribute anything into RIP, right? Redistribute BGP, and just type in the autonomous system number and hit the enter key. You don't have to specify a metric there because you've specified a default metric for everything that doesn't have a specific metric applied, right? Cool. Let's see if it works. Seriously, I mean, that's basic redistribution. I'm going to come over to ham, hit the up arrow, and look at that. We actually have all of these specific routes coming. Ooh, something worth mentioning. Look at this. All these routes came through as /24s. Notice I've got /20 or /32. Notice I've got /24 over here. So different subnet masks. What's up? OSPF's too smart for its own good sometimes. I actually emulated this using loopbacks. So I'm going to do a show IP interface brief. Notice I've got all these loopbacks. Let me just do a show run interface loopback 1, right? I typed in the right subnet mask. I didn't do a /32, but let me do a show IP OSPF interface. OSPF is like, I'm catching on what you're doing. I'm picking up what you're laying down here. Loopback 2 is actually a loopback. Even though you've got a /24, I'm saying it's a /32. And I'm going to say, you know what, OSPF, you're wrong. Because I'm in a lab. I'm going to go to loopback 1 and type in IP OSPF network point-to-point, right? Which essentially tricks OSPF, tricky protocol itself, and say, well, that's not really a loopback, that's a point-to-point network. Now check out what happens. I'll come over here to the ham router over on the left-hand side. So I'm back. Oh, I've lost it. Back over here. Hit the up arrow, and now notice it's like, there's my one network. It's coming through with the /24. So if you want a good lab environment, I would actually go type that command. Matter of fact, let's do it. I'll pause the video. There we go. We've flipped all those over, so now I should be able to come over here and have them all look like real. Oh, I missed one. There we go. Now we should be able to come over here and have them all look like real networks once it gets that update from RIP that the network has changed. Sometimes I just can't let those things go by. Okay, there we go. Now they're all looking the same. Okay, so that's the one-way redistribution. Now let's bring steak back into the picture and go the other way. Why? Because there's going to be different options. Check this out. I'm going to go on steak, and let's clear the slate a little bit, and go into router OSPF. right? Because that's going to be what we're redistributing into. I'm going to do redistribute RIP. Now, OSPF, believe it or not, you don't actually have to type the metric because the default is 20, but I'm going to just because I don't like just leaving things at default. Again, this is the seed metric. You just make one up. This is actually one of the big drawbacks of redistribution is you totally lose the accuracy of the metric because you as the admin just have to make something up. Now, notice we've got different options. Redistributing into different protocols will give you different options. One of the big ones, subnets. Oh my goodness, I have forgotten that one so many times. Subnet says, hey, rather than doing auto summarization or taking it back to the classful boundary, which what would happen here? 10.0.0/8 would end up coming across if I did not include that subnets, because notice it says consider subnets. Otherwise, it will just redistribute the classful version. So I get all the small ones. Also notice we have an option of metric type. Small ones, that would be subnets. Metric type, where this is, I'm telling you, every single time I forget this, I always have to look it up. Metric type is going to be E2 or E1. So E2 is the default. If you just press enter without specifying a metric type, it will use E2. And what that means is it will not increment the metric as the networks go through the network, or as the redistribute networks pass through. So let's just say all these little 10 networks, so we're going to send all the little ones through because we typed in subnets. They're going to come with a seed metric of 100, and when they reach eggs, it'll be 100. And when eggs sends it to the biscuits router, it's going to be 100. And when the biscuit router sends it to the bacon, and bacon sends it to applesauce, which is my head, and my head sends it down here to yogurt, all these different routers are going to show a metric of 100. It never changes at all. That's E2. E1 actually changes. Now you might say, well, what's the difference? Nowadays, honestly, not that big a deal. Although if you have multiple exit points from the system, you will most of the time want to use E1, because E1 will say, okay, I started with 100, but you know what? This link cost me 64 because it's a T1 line. So by the time it gets here, they're going to be 164. By the time it gets here, it's going to be 291. By the time it gets here, it's adding the cost of all these links going through. So watch this. I'll actually show this to you. Metric type 2, I hit the enter key, right? Let's hop over to eggs over there on the right-hand side and do a show IP route. Notice all the routes have come through. A little message coming through. All the routes have come through, and they are tagged as E2. Notice administrative distance 110, metric 100. 100. The seed metric, it's going to stay the same. Now, when I come back here and change it to metric type E1, come back here and do a little refresh, what's it doing? Look at this. 164 is what it's going to, because if I do a show IP OSPF interface serial 0/0, it's going to say, hey, that's a point-to-point network with a cost of 64. Why is it a cost of 64? Because OSPF cost equals 100 divided by bandwidth in megabit per second, which by default these things are T1, so 1.544, which ends up about 64. Right, that's where the cost comes in with some decimal point behind it. Right, so E2 keeps adding those costs going all the way through. Basic redistribution doesn't have all that much to it. It's just literally identifying the routing protocol and saying, I want to send it over here. Where it gets a little more complex is when you start adding redundant routers. You need to add filtering and say, well, these networks can't pass through. That's going to be the topic in some of the upcoming nuggets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.